What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Walt Harris had asked himself that question the moment the screen lit up in his quiet living room, the glow of YouTube cutting through the still Ohio evening like a flashlight in a cave. It was a Thursday, maybe a Friday, hard to tell anymore. His calendar on the wall was stuck on July. It was August. Or September. Maybe it didn't matter. He hadn't marked a date worth remembering in years. He sat there, alone, surrounded by his silence, an old recliner holding up the bones of a man who once believed he'd changed the world. His wife, Lorna, used to tease him about that. "You're going to redesign the way we move," she'd say, brushing the hair from his forehead before she slipped into sleep. That was 35 years ago, maybe more. Lorna was gone now. The house echoed when he coughed. The clocks ticked louder than they used to. His fingers trembled a little when he clicked the mouse. Arthritis. Or nerves. Or both. He had only clicked the video out of curiosity. Elon Musk unveils Hyperloop vision, the thumbnail had read, bold white letters over a stage lit in blue. He wasn't a Musk fanboy like the kids online, but something about the title stirred an itch in his chest, an echo of a life he hadn't touched in decades. So he clicked. Elon stepped onto the stage and began speaking, calm, strange, brilliant. Talking about vacuum tubes and solar panels, near supersonic travel on land, cutting the LA to San Francisco route from 6 hours to 35 minutes. Walt's jaw tightened. His eyes burned. Not because it was flashy, but because he'd dreamed it first. Not the exact version, no, but back in '85, he'd sketched a closed-loop magnetic rail with zero drag resistance. He called it Project 412, named after his wedding anniversary. He'd pitched it to a dozen firms, even DARPA. They all said no. Said it was too ahead of its time. Said he was wasting their time. So he buried the blueprints in the garage and never touched them again. Now here was this South African tech mogul, decades younger, dragging Walt's abandoned dream into the spotlight, and the crowd was eating it up. The applause through the screen made Walt's chest tighten, not out of jealousy, but grief. Grief for the man he used to be. For the things he used to believe were still possible. Outside, the wind rattled the siding. A storm was coming. Or maybe it was just the sound of another summer closing out. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Elon asked the audience, mid-presentation. The line wasn't even the main point. Just a throwaway comment during a tangent about innovation, about how the brain doesn't age nearly as fast as the body. But to Walt, it hit like thunder. He paused the video. Sat there. Heart pounding. That was the moment. Right then. That single line wrapped its fingers around his spine and didn't let go. He thought about his granddaughter calling last week, said she was learning to code. She'd asked him what he used to do. "I was an engineer," he said. "You know, the mechanical kind." She giggled. "Like with trains?" He laughed, but the sting stayed with him. He hadn't been seen as an engineer in years. Not even by himself. He was just Grandpa Walt, whose knees crackled like cereal when he stood up, who drank his coffee cold and didn't notice until it was empty. Who wore slippers to the grocery store and came home without remembering what he went for. But that night, something shifted. A flicker in the engine that had gone cold. He didn't sleep. Instead, he dug through boxes in the garage, coughing through dust, pulling out yellowed folders, old blueprints, graph paper with the fine lines of a man who once believed he could solve things. The light buzzed overhead as he flipped through sketches. There it was. Project 412. Sharp, detailed, beautiful. Useless. He laughed, then choked on it. He wasn't even sure if the physics held up anymore. But the feeling did. The feeling of what if. His hands trembled as he set the plans on the workbench. He stared at them for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and typed Hyperloop Community Forum. He found one. Full of young, brilliant minds throwing equations like confetti. He read post after post, then slowly, with aching fingers, made an account. Username, MaglevDad. He didn't expect anyone to notice. But he posted anyway. I designed something like this back in the 80s, he typed. Called it Project 412. Here are the specs. Curious if they hold up. He hit submit. Nothing happened for hours. Then one reply. Then another. Then 5. Most were skeptical. A few were mocking. One wrote, "Nice try, boomer." But one stood out. "Are you serious?" it read. "This is way ahead of its time. Want to talk?" The message came from a user named Jetlin27. Walt stared at it for a long time. He could feel his heart thumping in his chest, the way it used to before a presentation, before asking for Lorna's number, before a launch. He hadn't felt that in years. He wrote back, "Sure. Let's talk." The clock read 3:42 a.m. His coffee was cold again. He took a sip and smiled. Outside, the storm had passed. The first light of morning crawled over the edge of his garage door. Something was happening. Something big. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in decades, he wanted to find out. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before everything started to change, before Elon Musk's words shook something loose in the corners of Walt Harris's mind, before the blueprints were dusted off and the internet pulled him back into a world he thought he'd left behind, Walt's days were measured in coffee cups and weather reports. Sunrise through the same kitchen window. Black coffee brewed too strong. One piece of toast, maybe two if his blood sugar allowed. He'd sit at the table with a local newspaper folded over, not to read it. He already knew most of what was in there, but because the act made him feel like the man he used to be. Routine was a comfort, even when it was hollow. His house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a small Ohio town that hadn't changed much since the 1980s. Vinyl siding on every home, flagpoles in every yard, and porch lights that turned on not because someone needed them but because the timer was still set. His garage had once been a place of life. A workspace, a workshop, a lab where ideas had been born. Now it was where he kept bins of things he didn't want to throw away but couldn't bear to use. Power tools with cords wrapped neatly but rust creeping in. Engineering books from the 60s and 70s. A box marked, "Lorna, keep," that he hadn't opened since the funeral. That box lived beside the blueprints of Project 412, buried under old tarps and the weight of rejection. 35 years ago, he was a man on fire. He worked for Midwest Aerotech, back when aerospace still meant something around here. His specialty had been propulsion systems, and he had a mind for it, sharp, methodical, curious. He could look at a flawed schematic and see the fix in minutes. But even back then, Walt wasn't content to work within the limits. He started dreaming of alternative transport systems long before it was trendy. Maglev technology fascinated him. He saw in it the potential to change everything about how people moved. No friction. No noise. No fossil fuels. Just speed and elegance. In 1985, inspired by a cross-country train delay that made him miss Lorna's birthday dinner, he sat down at the kitchen table and started sketching. What emerged was an idea he couldn't shake: Project 412, a vacuum-sealed tube network powered by magnetic propulsion, connecting cities at unimaginable speeds. He believed in it. Believed so hard he poured months into refining the concept, calculating force ratios, drafting models by hand late into the night while Lorna brought him tea and massaged his shoulders. She never complained, even when he spent their savings on modeling software and sent proposals to NASA, to Boeing, to anyone who'd listen. No one did. One reviewer said, "This sounds like something out of a science fiction novel." Another said, even if it worked, the infrastructure costs would be insane. And who would ride in a tube? Walt had thick skin but thin faith. After rejection number 12, he closed the folder and filed it in the garage. Lorna hugged him and said, "They're wrong. Maybe not today, maybe not in our lifetime. But someday, someone will see what you saw." She always saw him. When she got sick, he stayed by her side. Brain cancer. The kind that starts fast and finishes faster. He sold their second car to pay for treatments. She lost her speech by the end, but her eyes never stopped saying "I love you." After she passed, the house changed. It wasn't gradual. It was instant. Color drained from the walls. Music stopped playing. Walt stopped talking to people, stopped dreaming. His son, Chris, called more often at first, then less. Their last real conversation was an argument about retirement homes. Chris wanted him somewhere safer. Walt wanted him to shut up. "You're just scared of being responsible," Walt snapped. Chris hung up. That was 3 years ago. They hadn't spoken since. Walt knew he wasn't easy to deal with. Pride had kept him alive during the bad years but also kept people away. His granddaughter, Mia, was the only one who still came by once in a while. She was 17 and brilliant and thought Walt was cool in a weird way, which he cherished more than she knew. But even she had started to drift, busy with college applications and TikTok and a boyfriend with a neck tattoo. Walt's world shrank by the year. His knees got worse. He stopped going to the hardware store. His doctor told him his blood pressure was a problem, told him to slow down, told him to take up Tai Chi or gardening. "You've done your part, Walt," the doctor said with that professional smile. "Now just enjoy the ride." But that's the thing, Walt didn't want a ride. He wanted a reason. Something to fix. Something to fight for. And yet he did nothing. For years. Because nothing called to him. Not until that video. Not until Elon's words cracked something open. He remembered sitting there that night, eyes locked on the screen, and seeing not a billionaire, not a headline, but a mirror. A man talking about doing impossible things because why not? Talking about building things because someone has to. Elon didn't remind Walt of the future. He reminded him of the past, the version of himself who used to believe logic and passion could change the world. That belief had dulled over time, sanded down by loss and rejection. But belief, like rust, doesn't disappear. It waits. It clings. It needs only pressure and air to spread again. That night, after the video, when Walt went into the garage and found the plans, he didn't think it was about changing the world. He just wanted to feel like himself again. He rolled out the blueprint, ran his fingers over the paper, remembered how Lorna used to sit beside him with a pencil behind her ear and a glass of Merlot on the workbench. He could almost hear her voice. "You're onto something." He was 68 now. His hands didn't work like they used to. His back ached if he stood too long. His reflexes were slower. But his mind, the one tool he trusted most, was still sharp in the ways that mattered. He remembered equations. He remembered torque. He remembered how magnetic resistance worked. And more importantly, he remembered why he built the design in the first place. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about patents. It was about building a better way forward. He used to think that dream died with Lorna. But maybe he'd just buried it, too afraid to lose something again. After the forum post, he sat in his chair for hours, waiting to see if anyone would care. Most didn't. That was expected. But the one message that said, "This is ahead of its time," kept ringing in his head. Not because it was praise. Because it was validation. Someone saw him. A stranger, sure, but someone. Maybe he wasn't too late. Maybe he wasn't done. Maybe he didn't need permission to start again. He looked around the garage, made mental notes of what tools still worked. Some would need repairs. Others replaced. His hands weren't steady enough to weld anymore, but maybe he could get help. Maybe there was still use in the old man with too many ideas and not enough time. When Lorna passed, Walt stopped believing in beginnings. But now, something whispered that the end might not be coming for him just yet. Maybe, just maybe, the beginning was only waiting for him to remember who he was before the world told him he was finished. It was a strange thing, waking up with a sense of purpose after so many years of drifting. Walt Harris stood in his kitchen the morning after posting on the Hyperloop forum, the sunlight slanting through the blinds like golden jail bars, his old coffee maker sputtering to life as if surprised to be used again. The smell filled the space like it used to, back when Lorna hummed to herself and the news played in the background. Now the house was quiet except for the soft groan of old wood settling and the faint buzz of electricity from the underused outlets. Walt held his mug with two hands, stared at the steam, and wondered if he was about to make a fool of himself. It wouldn't be the first time. It was easy to believe in something at midnight when the world was quiet and the heart was louder than logic. But in daylight, things changed. Doubt came in waves, crashing reminders of his age, his body, his limitations. His left knee hurt from standing too long in the garage the night before. His back throbbed like it was filing a complaint. Even his fingers ached, slow to respond, like the rusted tools he used to keep so sharp. He opened his laptop, half expecting the forum to have moved on without him. But the message from Jetlin 27 was still there. This is ahead of its time. Want to talk? Simple words, but they lodged in his chest like an ember refusing to die. He clicked on the username and saw that Jetlin 27 had a profile photo, a young guy, maybe mid-20s, Asian American, thin-rimmed glasses, background of what looked like a startup lab, screens everywhere. His bio read, Lead Engineer, Velocity Loop Labs, Las Vegas. Walt read it twice. Then a third time. Las Vegas? Hyperloop? Startup? It all sounded like a different world. Still, he wrote back. Sure. Let's talk. Tomorrow morning. He hit send before he could second-guess it, then sat back in his chair and stared out the window as a single leaf fell from the maple tree out front, spinning like a slow-motion coin toss. That afternoon, he drove to the community center. He hadn't been in a while, mostly because it depressed him. The air always smelled like cafeteria food and sanitizer, and the conversation was either about pills, grandkids, or who had passed away recently. Familiar faces, gray and worn, nodded at him. He nodded back. Walt, said Carl from table 3, you still working on them inventions? It was a joke, meant kindly, but Walt flinched. Something like that, he said, and moved on. In the craft room, Margaret showed him her watercolor of a hummingbird. I don't know why I bother, she said, her hands shaking as she held it up. It's not like I'm gonna get discovered. Walt stared at the painting for a long moment. Maybe you already have, he said, and surprised even himself. Later, in the hallway, a nurse stopped him. Walt, your primary care doc sent us a note, she said. He's recommending you take it easy. Maybe avoid extended standing or stress. You've had some elevated numbers. Walt forced a smile. I'll try to avoid excitement. That's the spirit, she said, patting his arm like he was a veteran home from war. That night, he sat in his garage again, but the noise of doubt was louder now. What was he doing? He hadn't been part of an engineering conversation in decades. The terminology had changed. The technology had evolved. He didn't even know how to use half the software these kids worked with. He pulled out one of his old notebooks, filled with formulas and diagrams, and tried solving a simple magnetic resistance equation. It took him 20 minutes. His handwriting was messier than it used to be. He looked down at his trembling fingers and wondered, not for the first time, if he was chasing ghosts. On his nightstand sat a photo of Lorna, younger than he ever felt now, holding a wine glass and laughing at something he couldn't remember. "Tell me if I'm being stupid," he whispered to her. "Tell me if this is just pride talking." But the photo only smiled back, silent and knowing. At 10 a.m. sharp the next day, the video call came through. Walt hesitated before answering, stared at his reflection in the small preview window, wrinkled, tired, old. Then he hit accept. Jaden Lin appeared on screen, bright-eyed, surrounded by blinking lights and motion on every wall behind him. "Mr. Harris," he said, smiling. "Thanks for responding." "Call me Walt," he said. Mr. Harris sounds like a science teacher from 1962. Jaden laughed. "All right, Walt. I gotta say, I didn't expect to see that kind of schematic from a forum post. You really drew this up in the 80s? Walt nodded. "With a drafting pen and a calculator the size of a shoebox." "It's beautiful," Jaden said. "I showed it to our lead. She thought it was some kind of simulation. The logic, it's clean. Elegant. A few tweaks and it could be something big." "I'm too old to be big," Walt said, half joking. Jaden leaned closer. "Innovation doesn't have a retirement age." For a moment, the words hung in the air. Then they dug in. They talked for an hour. Jaden asked questions Walt hadn't answered in years. Walt scribbled notes, surprised at how much he remembered. They talked about friction coefficients, vacuum pressure, real-time sensors, and infrastructure viability. Walt lost himself in the conversation, not as an old man playing pretend, but as an engineer again. When the call ended, Walt sat in silence. Then he stood. Not quickly. Not easily. But with purpose. Later that week, he told Mia, his granddaughter, about the call. She stared at him like he'd just told her he'd met Beyoncé. "Grandpa, you're talking to Hyperloop engineers," she said, eyes wide. "Like, real ones?" "Apparently," Walt said. "That's insane. You should totally go meet them. Like, in person. I'm not exactly built for cross-country flights anymore." "Please," she said. "You're tougher than half the people I know." Her words stuck with him. Like Jaden's. Like Elon's. But it wasn't all hope and spark. That weekend, Chris called. First time in 3 years. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Mia told me you're building something again." Walt hesitated. "I'm revisiting an old project." "Jesus, Dad. Are you okay? You're not getting confused?" "No," Walt said sharply. "Just awake." Chris sighed. "I'm just worried, okay? You had a mini-stroke 3 years ago. Your BP is a mess. What if you push too hard and something happens? Then I'll die doing something that matters," Walt snapped, then regretted it. The silence that followed was longer than it should have been. "Look," Chris said, softer, "I get it. I really do. But just, be careful." "Thanks for the permission," Walt said, and hung up. That night, doubt came crashing again. Was this a midlife crisis with bad timing? Was he proving something, or just running from the truth? He didn't know. All he knew was that something inside him had shifted, and now he couldn't go back. He stood in the garage again, looked at the model, and whispered, "Is it too late?" No one answered. But the air felt heavier. As if the past was watching. As if Lorna was watching. He opened his laptop. A new message from Jaden blinked on the screen. "I showed your propulsion sketch to our lead again. We want to fly you out. Just for a visit. No pressure. But we think there's something here." Walt stared at the message for a long time. His heart beat like a drum. His mind raced. His body ached. But his soul whispered yes. Because the war wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. And for the first time in a long time, Walt Harris wasn't losing it. The morning after the invitation came, Walt Harris sat at the edge of his bed staring at the floor like it might tell him what to do. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every creak in the wood sound like a decision being made. The message from Jaden was still fresh in his mind: "We want to fly you out. Just for a visit." Walt had read it at least a dozen times, hovering between disbelief and terror. At 68, the idea of hopping on a plane to a high-tech facility in Las Vegas was equal parts thrilling and absurd. He hadn't flown anywhere since Lorna's funeral service in Arizona, and even that had left him with a sore back and a soul so heavy it nearly dragged him down the jet bridge. This would be different, he told himself. This wasn't an obligation. This was something like hope. Still, it felt ridiculous. What did he know any more about modern engineering? Or travel? Or working with people young enough to be his grandchildren? And yet the thought kept needling him: what if this is the thing I was waiting for? He stood slowly, bones popping like knuckles cracking, and shuffled to the bathroom. He stared at himself in the mirror, the face looking back at him older than he remembered, thinner too, with those sunken cheeks that Lorna used to fill out with laughter. But the eyes were still there. The same eyes that once dreamed of magnets and machines and ideas so wild they could power a new world. He grabbed a razor. It took twice as long to shave now, but he did it anyway. Then he reached into the closet and pulled out the blazer he hadn't worn since the memorial. He brushed it off, tried it on. Still fit. Sort of. At least enough to remind him that he was still a man with a mind worth using. He drove to the post office to pick up a passport renewal form. The woman at the counter looked skeptical when he asked how quickly he could get it expedited. "Where you headed, sir?" she asked. "Vegas," he said. "Got a meeting with some engineers." She raised an eyebrow. "You visiting family?" "No," he said. "I might be helping them build a train that goes 700 miles an hour." She stared at him like he'd just announced he was joining NASA, then laughed politely and slid him the form. Walt drove home in silence, form on the passenger seat, fingers tapping the steering wheel. At a red light, he glanced at the cars around him. People his age weren't doing this. They were golfing or gardening or sitting in waiting rooms watching the clock tick toward their next blood pressure check. Maybe that's what he should be doing. Maybe he was insane. But then again, maybe that's what all breakthroughs felt like at first, completely insane. At home, he opened the garage and walked inside. His workbench was a mess of old diagrams, fresh sketches, coffee mugs, and bolts that no longer had names. He pulled out the blueprints for Project 412 and stared at them, then snapped a photo with his phone and sent it to Jaden with a short message: "Tell your team I'll come. Let's set a date." A few minutes later, the reply came back: "Yes. Can't wait to meet you, Walt. I'll handle the travel. We'll take care of everything." That evening, he told Mia. She jumped off the couch like someone had plugged her into a power source. "Wait, like you're actually going to Vegas? To work with the Hyperloop people?" "Just a visit," he said. "Consultation?" "Probably nothing." "Grandpa, are you kidding? This is amazing. Can I post about it?" "Absolutely not. I already did." She grinned, and he didn't have the heart to scold her. The next day, his phone buzzed with notifications. Messages from strangers on the forum. Comments like, "Can't believe someone was working on this in the 80s, and proof that real engineers never retire." Someone even made a meme out of his blueprint and called it "vintage genius." Walt didn't know whether to laugh or shut down the internet entirely. He settled for turning the ringer off. The real breakthrough came that afternoon, when he stepped outside for a walk. It was something his doctor had been bugging him to do for months, but this time he wasn't walking out of obligation. He walked with a purpose. Down the driveway, around the cul-de-sac, past the Wilsons' mailbox and the Johnsons' dog that barked at him like it was defending Fort Knox. His joints ached, but the air felt good in his lungs. He felt awake, more than he had in years. The next day, he walked twice. He even took the longer route through the park. On the third day, he pulled out a notebook and started jotting down questions he wanted to ask Jayden and his team. Questions about energy load, tunnel pressure, field balancing at high speeds. Questions he thought he'd forgotten how to ask. The mind, he realized, was like a machine, it just needed to be restarted. A week later, the plane ticket arrived in his inbox. Departure, Columbus to Las Vegas. Round trip. First class. Jayden's doing. You've earned it, he wrote. Walt packed lightly. Just the essentials, blueprints, notes, the old calculator that still worked despite its cracked screen, and Lorna's watch, the one she wore every day for 40 years. He didn't believe in luck, but he believed in remembering who you were when you needed to be brave. At the airport, everything moved too fast. People with earbuds and rolling bags and drinks in cups so tall they looked like science experiments. The TSA agent raised an eyebrow when he pulled out his calculator. "What is this?" she asked. "Just my brain," Walt said. She didn't laugh, but let him through. On the plane, a man in a business suit asked him what he was traveling for. Walt thought about lying, then said, "I'm going to meet some engineers. We're trying to build the first real Hyperloop." The man stared at him, confused, then shrugged and put his headphones on. Walt didn't care. He stared out the window as the plane rose through the clouds, the land falling away beneath him, and wondered what Lorna would say if she could see him now. Probably something like, "Took you long enough." Vegas hit like a punch of heat and light. Neon signs, endless noise, the smell of fried food and desperation at the baggage claim. But once he met Jayden at the curb, slim, excited, wearing a t-shirt that said, "Build crazy things," it all melted away. "You made it," Jayden said, shaking his hand with a kind of reverence that caught Walt off guard. "Of course I did," Walt said. "Didn't come this far to turn around." They drove to the Velocity Loop facility 20 minutes outside the city. A stark contrast to the chaos of the Strip, clean, modern, quiet. Inside, it was a different world. White boards covered in formulas. 3D printers humming in corners. Prototypes lined up like children waiting for recess. The team was young, diverse, all eyes turning toward him as he walked in. Some nodded. Some whispered. One woman in a lab coat stepped forward. "Mr. Harris," she said. "I'm Dr. Felicia Ramos. I've been looking over your propulsion notes. You're either a time traveler or a genius." "I'll take either," Walt said, and she smiled. They gave him a tour, showed him the test loop, asked him to explain part of his model. He spoke slowly, careful not to let nerves trip him up, but the language came back easily. Engineering, like music, has a rhythm you don't forget. That night, in his hotel room, Walt lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling fan spin. He felt like a stranger in his own life, older, slower, but somehow more alive than he'd been in a decade. The Hyperloop wasn't just a tube through the desert. It was a symbol. A reminder. That movement still mattered. That he still mattered. He didn't know where this was going, or how long it would last. But this first step, was more than enough. It was proof. That it was never too late to build something new. Not just out there in the world. But inside yourself. The flight back home felt different. Not because of the first-class seat or the polite flight attendant who called him Mr. Harris and offered him ginger ale with a cloth napkin, but because of the weight he now carried, not the weight of age, or loss, or regret, but the weight of possibility. When the wheels touched down in Columbus, and the cabin lights flickered on, Walt felt like a different man than the one who had left. He wasn't sure what had happened in that facility in Nevada. Maybe it was the way Felicia had studied his notes like sacred texts, or the way Jaden scribbled down his offhand comment about magnetic alignment like it was gospel, or maybe it was just the look in their eyes. They didn't see an old man playing at relevance. They saw a peer. A contributor. A builder. As he pulled into his driveway that evening, the sun dipping behind the roofline, casting long shadows over the lawn that hadn't been mowed in 2 weeks, Walt stepped out of the car and looked toward the garage. The door was closed, but in his mind, it was wide open. Not just physically, but metaphorically, a space that had once symbolized the end of a dream now pulsed with new life. He didn't even go into the house right away. Instead, he walked straight to the garage, fumbled for the light switch, and stood there for a long time in the soft hum of the fluorescent bulbs, just breathing it in. The smell of oil, dust, aging wood, solder, and something older, hope. He pulled off the tarps, one by one, revealing parts he'd half forgotten about. The hydraulic pressure tester he'd built from a busted lawnmower and an old aquarium pump. The early magnetic rail prototype that had almost shocked him into the hospital. And the steel frame he'd welded in 1986 with the intention of building a one-man test sled that never quite came together. He stood there with hands on his hips, heart pounding, not from the exertion but from the vision blooming again behind his eyes. Not the past this time, but the future. And this time, he wasn't doing it alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Walt turned his garage into something between a time machine and a workshop. Mia helped him set up a second monitor. Jaden shipped him a refurbished 3D printer. Felicia sent him a full software suite with a note that read, "Use this like you used to use your drafting board." And Walt did. Each morning began with coffee, a blood pressure pill, and a walk around the block to get the joints moving. Then straight to the garage. He sketched, measured, tested. He started slow, replicating the newer loop curvature models from Velocity Loop's testing, but then found himself layering in his own innovations. Subtle angle shifts, material substitutions, tweaks to the acceleration chamber that would reduce energy drag by a measurable amount. He uploaded his findings every few days, and the team responded in kind. Jaden started calling him, the old wizard. Walt hated it at first. Then he started signing his forum posts with a little emoji of a wand. At night, he dreamed again, not of Lorna, though she still visited from time to time, always smiling, always quiet, but of speed, of tunnels, of machines moving with impossible grace through sealed chambers across the desert floor. One night, he dreamed of standing in front of the first Hyperloop pod, sleek and silver, watching it power up while a crowd of engineers looked on. Mia was there, and Chris too, though they didn't speak in the dream, just smiled like they were proud of him in a way he didn't recognize but desperately needed. In the mornings, he would scribble these dreams down in a notebook marked W.H. Field Notes. One afternoon, while welding a section of a small-scale mock-up, his hand slipped. Not badly, but enough to burn his thumb and make him drop the tool with a sharp curse. He sat down heavily, hand in his lap, pain radiating through his skin like fire meeting bone. The garage fell silent. Just him, the sound of his breathing, and the bitter sting of reality crashing back in. He stared at the red welt forming on his thumb and felt the old voice creep back in, "You're too old for this. You should be careful. This is how accidents happen. This is how dreams die, one mistake at a time." For a moment, he considered putting it all away. Storing it again. Admitting that maybe, just maybe, it was enough to know he could help, even if he shouldn't. But then he heard the voice, not the voice of doubt, but another one, sharper, bolder. Elon's voice. A clip he'd seen a dozen times, playing in his head like a recording, "If something's important enough, you do it. Even if the odds aren't in your favor." Walt stood up slowly, wrapped his hand in a cool cloth, and walked back to the bench. The weld would wait until tomorrow. But the dream wouldn't. That night, Mia came by with dinner, take-out burgers and milkshakes, and found him sitting in the garage, bandaged hand cradling a sketchpad. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked, sitting cross-legged on the stool beside him. Just a reminder I'm not 25 anymore, he said with a half-smile. Or even 55. She looked over his shoulder at the diagram. What's this part? It's a pressure stabilization ring. Helps maintain internal air displacement when the pod hits max velocity. She whistled. Sounds smart. That's the idea. You're gonna build it? Not the real thing. Just the prototype. Then the kids out west take it from there. You know what's weird, she said, stealing a fry from the bag. Every time I tell people what you're doing, they're like, no way, that's so cool. And do you tell them it's just some old guy in a dusty garage? I tell them you're part of the team building America's first Hyperloop. Because you are. Walt didn't say anything. Just nodded. The words meant more than she knew. Later that week, he received an unexpected package. A steel nameplate, engraved. Walter Harris, Innovator/Systems Consultant, Project Velocity. No note. Just the plate. But he knew where it came from. And he knew where it belonged. He bolted it to the top of the workbench the next morning. Let it catch the light. Let it remind him. He wasn't playing engineer. He was one. Again. One morning, while jogging data between two monitors, he got an alert from the forum. His original post from weeks ago had been reposted by a major tech blog. Over 100,000 views. Comments ranging from, "This guy is a legend," to, "Why aren't we funding this?" to, "Proof that you don't stop being useful when you hit 65. The post was trending under the hashtag #GarageDreams. Walt didn't know what to make of it. But that night, while sipping tea and icing his knee, he thought of something Lorna used to say, "Don't be afraid when people notice you. Be afraid when you have nothing worth noticing." The next day, he got a call from Jaden. "We want you back out here next month," he said. "Our Phase 2 trials are getting real. You've got designs we can't replicate without your help." Walt looked around the garage. It still smelled like work and memory. The calendar still read August. But the air felt like September, like change. "I'll be there," he said. "Let's build something impossible." As he hung up, he looked around at the tools, the sketches, the bits of old projects reborn. This wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a launch pad. A proving ground. A sacred space where a man could fail, learn, adapt, and dream again. And this time, he wasn't dreaming alone. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning just as Walt was reviewing the latest pressure differential model from the prototype test team in Nevada. The garage was still cool from the night before, the air dense with the smell of warm metal and graphite pencil shavings, and he had a fresh cup of coffee steaming on the shelf next to the monitor. He didn't recognize the number at first, area code from Boston. He nearly let it ring out. But something about the timing, about the weight in the air, made him swipe the green button and hold the phone to his ear. "This is Walt." There was a pause, then a voice he hadn't heard in 17 years. "Walt. It's Donna." At first, his mind raced through half a dozen Donnas, old clients, Lorna's friends from church, someone from the bank maybe. But then her tone, the slight crack at the edge of her words, tugged it out of the shadows. Donna Price. His sister-in-law. Lorna's younger sister. The one who hadn't called since the funeral. The one who had stormed out of the hospital room saying she couldn't watch her sister fade like that. "Donna," he said, sitting down slowly, as if the floor beneath him had shifted. "It's been a while." "Too long," she said softly. "I saw you on the news." "Not you exactly, your project. The Hyperloop thing. And then I saw your name. Walt Harris. I thought, no way. But then I saw the photo. I couldn't believe it." Walt blinked at the blueprint on his screen. The equations now looked like hieroglyphs. "Well," he said, "I'm still here. Another pause. I don't know why I'm calling. I thought Lorna would have been proud. He didn't say anything. The silence on the line stretched between them like a tightrope. You know, she added, back when you two were just dating, she used to tell me about your garage experiments. The first time you ever kissed her was right after you showed her your wind tunnel prototype. Remember that? Walt smiled despite himself. She said it was the ugliest contraption she'd ever seen. And you said it wasn't for beauty, it was for speed. They both laughed, soft and brittle. I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Donna continued. For disappearing. After she passed. I didn't know how to carry that grief, and you reminded me too much of her. I get it, he said. I wasn't exactly good company back then. No. But you were always solid. Always building something. I see that hasn't changed. Walt leaned back in the chair, the old wood creaking under him. It did. For a while. I shut it all down. The blueprints, the workshop, the ideas. Thought I was done. And now? Now I'm trying again. Slower. Wiser. Maybe even better. That's what I called to say. It's not just the engineering. It's the trying. He looked out the window. The light was climbing over the trees. Thanks, Donna. That means more than you know. After they hung up, he sat still for a long time, the warmth of old memories creeping in from the corners of the room. He remembered Lorna's hands, always warm, always moving, and how she used to say that no one could stop a man with a purpose, not even time. That night, he opened the old photo box buried in the closet. He hadn't looked through it in years. Inside were Polaroids from college, faded anniversary cards, vacation shots from the Smoky Mountains, and one picture that stopped him cold. Lorna, standing in front of his first magnetic levitation test bed, laughing, one hand in her hair, the other holding the clipboard where she was supposed to record results. She hadn't written anything that day. She just watched him work, eyes full of curiosity and love. He taped the photo above the workbench, right next to the schematic for the Phase 2 rail system. She'd never see the final version, but somehow, she was part of it now. Over the next few days, the past kept calling back in different ways. On Friday, he got a message from Howard Mayfield, his old college roommate and former co-developer on the abandoned Sky Pulse project they'd worked on in '74. Heard about the Hyperloop stuff, it read. You finally getting the credit we all knew you deserved. Walt chuckled at the message and replied, trying not to trip over my own ego on the way there. Howard replied instantly, let's grab coffee. I'm passing through next week. Got some old drawings I think you'll want to see. On Saturday, while waiting in line at the hardware store, someone tapped his shoulder. Excuse me, the man said, holding up his phone. Are you the guy from the Velocity Loop article? The one working on the Hyperloop? Walt nodded slowly. That's me. The man smiled. My dad's your age. He gave up everything after he retired. Says there's nothing left for him to do. But I showed him your story. He's back in his workshop now. Just wanted you to know. Walt thanked him, heart heavier than he expected. Inspiration, he realized, worked both ways. On Sunday, he pulled the old crate of Project 412 parts from the attic and opened it in the garage. He thought he'd forgotten what was in there, but the moment the lid came off, it all rushed back. The aluminum-titanium hybrid ring. The copper windings he'd coiled by hand. The controller board with the malfunctioning chip he never replaced. He laid them all out like relics. Not broken dreams. Not wasted time. Just unfinished work. He photographed each one, sent them to Jaden, and within an hour got a call. Walt, Jaden said, nearly breathless. That magnetic ring, we've been trying to reverse engineer something almost identical. Your version's simpler. More durable. Can we replicate it? Not only can you, Walt replied, I'll help you build it. He spent the next 5 days in a whirlwind of motion, running tests, modeling variations, uploading data, jumping on late-night Zoom calls with engineers half a country away who called him Sir and Mentor and, occasionally, Yoda. The burn on his hand had mostly healed, though the skin was still pink and tender. He wore it like a badge. On Thursday, Chris called. It was a short conversation, hesitant, but honest. Mia told me everything, he said. The news, the project, the lab in Nevada. I saw the pictures. I guess I just didn't know how to talk to you anymore. Neither did I, Walt said. Guess we're both learning. Chris exhaled. You seem different. Maybe I am. Or maybe you're finally the same again. It wasn't a reconciliation. Not fully. But it was the start of one. The past had called back. And this time, Walt had picked up the phone. On Friday evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the garage windows, Walt powered down the monitors and stepped outside. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the air warm but not heavy. He walked down to the street, crossed the empty cul-de-sac, and sat on the bench by the park where he and Lorna used to watch Mia chase fireflies. The world had changed so much since then. Faster. Louder. Younger. But the stars still blinked into view like they always had, patient, steady, ancient. Somewhere in the desert, a test track waited. Somewhere in Nevada, a team of dreamers were getting ready for the next breakthrough. And in a quiet corner of Ohio, in a garage that had once symbolized everything he'd lost, a man who had been written off by the world was building again. The past had knocked. But it hadn't come to haunt him. It had come to remind him that even the things we think are finished can still begin again. Especially when we're brave enough to open the door. The phone rang while Walt was hunched over his drafting board in the garage, tinkering with the magnetic induction system's calibration. He had just added a thin graphite-lined gasket around the alignment rail to reduce friction, testing a simulation on his laptop when the call came in. He glanced at the caller ID, a name he barely recognized, Velocity Loop Admin. He hesitated before pressing accept. On the line, Jaden's voice sounded clipped, urgent. Walt, listen, we've just got preliminary analysis back from the lab. Your graphite gasket innovation. It improves thermal stability by 12%. That's huge. Huge. Walt struggled to breathe. That's good news. It's better than good. It's a breakthrough. They've already scheduled a satellite meeting to discuss the next steps. But they're wondering, do you want to join in person or remote? Walt nodded, gesturing to a half-mechanic, half-poet world where older hands still built futures. I'll drive out, he said. I want in the room when it happens. Everything after that felt like a blur. The messages, the confirmations, the pre-flight medical check from his doctor insisting he'll be careful. Remember, the nurse had said, we like you around. We just want you safe. Walt smiled and said he'd wave at her from an office building in Nevada. In truth, neither of them knew what safe looked like in a life that had quit on safety decades ago. When the morning of the trip arrived, he packed his bag, the same one he used last time, containing blueprints, printouts of his latest data, the sentimental watch, and Lorna's photo tucked inside the blazer pocket. The drive to the airport itself felt ceremonial, as though he was marching toward redemption, not just a flight. At security, he was stopped again, questioned about the graphite-coated ring scanner he carried. He said it was a prototype model for temperature testing. The TSA officer nodded, scribbled something, and let him pass, glancing at the blueprint lines like hieroglyphs. On the plane, he fell into a restless half-sleep, drifting in and out of dreams where the Hyperloop was a silver snake winding across the deserts of Nevada, propelled by pulses of electricity and imagination. He woke only when the seatbelt sign dinged, a reminder that he was, for now, still of flesh and blood. The valley appeared beneath him, dotted with tracks, buildings, and a planned path for the Hyperloop's future tunnel. His heart hitched at how tangible it all felt now, so close you could touch it. When he stepped off the jet bridge, Jaden was waiting. Same grin, same energy, young, sharp-edged, unstoppable. "Glad you made it," said Jaden, handing him a bottle of water. "Everyone's gearing up for your session. Call's starting in an hour." Walt sipped, then swallowed past something warm. They drove together, the car slicing through the desert light, the heat blooming on the windshield like a promise. At the facility, it was familiarity mixed with rocket fuel. Whiteboards scrawled with notes. Pods tested on small loops. Computers humming, calculations running. The room felt alive. And Walt, walking in with his notebook, his shaky penmanship, his sweat-stained blazer, felt like a stranger among giants who somehow belonged by right. The satellite room was packed. Engineers clustered around screens, some men, some women, nearly all younger than his granddaughter. They nodded respectfully when he walked in. One, Elena, a materials specialist, paused beside him. "Mr. Harris, your gasket concept could save us months of cooling cycles." "That's huge." Walt nodded. The words tasted strange in his mouth. "Thank you," he said. "Glad it helps." The meeting began. On the main screen, Jaden introduced him. "We're here to test the thermal efficiency enhancements from the gasket Walt designed. Initial heat maps look phenomenal. Let's walk through the baseline, then overlay Walt's design. Ready?" Walt watched as streamed graphs shimmered, baseline in black, his design in red, stark and rising beyond expectation. They showed stress tests, temperature decay, energy retention, all better. He thought about the nights in the garage, maps of equations bleeding across the desk, coffee staining sketches, the ache in his fingers from drafting late at night. All of it leading to this. But then came a knock at the door, and the room cleared. The new director of R&D entered, mid-30s, composed, skeptical. She looked at the results and at Walt. "Mr. Harris," she began, voice polite but testing. "These results are surprising." Walt let that hang. She continued, "Your concept reduces thermal drift, yes. But are you certain it scales? This isn't a model, it's trajectory. At 700 miles an hour, errors that small could cascade." Walt inhaled, remembering Lorna's voice. "It's not for beauty. I understand. Let's run a suite of scaled models. I'd recommend simulated nodes at different pressure zones and rung configurations. That should tell us linearly how performance varies. We can fix it." He added, "Better to simulate tougher now than fix failures later." She nodded slowly. The room held its breath. A technician flicked on the simulation. Everyone saw the numbers swap in perfect balance. A slow murmur rose. Then, Jaden's voice, low, reverent. "We're on to something." The director nodded again, more sure. "Okay, we'll proceed. We'll roll this into the next phase." "Great work." The tension in Walt's shoulders unlocked, drained out in a rush. Applause echoed in the room, maybe reflex. But something in his chest glowed warm. He had been seen. Literally. Not as an old man living in his past, but as a living solution. After the meeting, Jaden guided him out. "You were incredible in there," he said. "Not many people can hold a room like you did." Walt smiled, the rusty gears inside greased by faith. "It's still possible," he said simply. Jaden nodded. "It is." Outside, the sun cut sharp lines across the concrete. A photographer from a tech magazine approached, camera clicking, words flowing. "May I get a picture of Mr. Walt Harris beside his original gasket model?" Before he knew it, a small gathering formed. Engineers asked about his background, his days at Midwest Aerotech, his inspiration. He answered quietly, precisely, suddenly comfortable. A model for the press, maybe. A poster for anyone who needed one. A reporter asked, "What made you restart?" Walt thought of everything, the forum comment that said, "You actually worked on maglev?" The hushed light in Jaden's eyes. The names of people who believed, relative and stranger alike. "I guess I forgot something," he said. "That being different isn't a curse. It's work." Afterward, Jaden insisted on dinner in the on-site cafeteria, big trays and stale coffee, but Walt didn't care. He threw back soda like old man juice, laughed at jokes, recounted stories about Lorna and paper model rail systems. No one made him feel like a relic. They made him feel vital. That night, he lay in his room staring at the ceiling, the wires of the fan traced by desert moonlight through the window. He felt every year behind him, not as weight, but as layers of experience, like sediment building toward bedrock. He closed his eyes and saw Lorna laughing, Mia watching, Chris listening. The Hyperloop wasn't just a tube in a desert anymore. It was a bridge between generations, between doubt and possibility, between who he was and who he could still become. And for the first time in decades, Walt slept dreaming of tomorrow. It started in small, subtle ways, almost imperceptible acts of defiance that grew into a silent rebellion, a way of moving against a current that had pulled Walt under for too long. It began with changing his routine. Instead of slow, cautious steps into the garage, he started walking through the threshold with purpose, each step punctuated by invisible intention. He replaced his soft slippers with well-worn work boots. Sturdier, no nonsense. His back still ached, his joints still complained, but now that pain felt familiar, almost comforting, as if a dormant machine had sputtered back to life. He showed up every morning, workbench lit and tools readied, as if the world expected him and the world would wait. He began writing again, not just formulas and schematics, but journal entries titled, "Why I Refuse to Fade," full of candid admissions, fear, longing, and a deep yearning to matter. He tacked a single Elon Musk quote above the bench, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." It glared at him with its blunt promise. He stared at it for long moments. Then he tore his pen through the word disaster until it was just change. Change. He circled it. It became his rallying cry. The forum conversations evolved. Once a place of one-off technical notes and polite skepticism, Maglev Dad's thread became a hub for other seniors who'd rediscovered something. Something they couldn't quite name, but it filled their bones. They shared sketches, handwritten notes, links to forgotten patents, and memories of dreams deferred. Walt watched the thread grow, the participants swelling from a handful to dozens. Comments like, "You made me dig out my old telescopes again," and "My hip still hurts but tonight I pulled out the old sewing machine." It filled his heart more than any praise ever could. He didn't announce it, but he started hosting a weekly video call for forum members, the Silver Sparks Workshop. He showed them how to calibrate sensors, clean circuit boards, relearn what it meant to build. Participation was modest and ragged at first, but earnest. A retired teacher from Michigan joined with a simple solar panel project to light her front porch. An ex-cartographer from Oregon started sketching a self-watering planter for his garden. Their projects weren't rocket science, but that wasn't the point. The point was being seen, heard, remembered. His son noticed. One morning, while he was broadcasting a workshop live, explaining how to test electromagnets, a message popped up from Chris on the chat, "Wow, I didn't know you were like this." It wasn't confrontational, just stunned. Walt didn't answer then. He didn't need to. He felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. Rumors began to drift through the town. The Wilsons murmured about Walt's nightly work in the garage, lamps on until midnight, sparks through the gap where the door didn't close all the way. The local hardware clerk mentioned he'd seen Walt wandering the aisles for components unusual for his age, microcontrollers, neodymium magnets, thermal sensors. A neighborhood kid asked his mother, why is Mr. Harris acting like a college professor again? The answer was simple, he was alive again. Then, one evening, he heard it, laughter, soft, bright laughter, echoing from inside the garage. Mia, sitting on the stool, sketching out an idea with him, elbow grazing his arm. Walt realized the sound had left his house at the dinner table years ago. He realized, wrenchingly, how much he'd missed it. One morning, standing over his soldering iron, the phone rang. It was Donna. She had a proposition. She wanted to collaborate on a fundraising event called Golden Sparks, a local community gathering to highlight elder creativity, like a mini tech fair mixed with art, where seniors could showcase anything they had revived: engines, quilts, letters, robotics, anything that said, "I'm still here." Walt hesitated, old fears of exposure, of embarrassment, but something in the thread of his memory, Lorna's eyes, the team's faith, nudged him forward. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "Yes, let's do it." They planned. Donna reached out to the community center, the coffee shop, the high school auditorium. Flyers went up. Golden Sparks, never too old to begin again, they read. Not everyone understood. Some thought it was pity. Others thought it was sweet. But those who knew, or were ready to be known again, felt the pulse of it. On the day of the event, Walt leaned against a battered door frame, watching the room fill with tables. Retirees manned display boards next to homemade inventions. The retired florist showed off a motorized potting bench, the ex-accountant displayed a solar-powered calculator he built himself, an 82-year-old widow showcased origami with embedded LED lights. Mia's film project, she'd made a mini-documentary about her grandfather's journey, played in a corner. When she appeared on screen saying, "He taught me that once you stop trying, that's when the end really starts," Walt's throat caught, and he blinked against tears. Donna called him to the front. Walter Harris, community engineer, dream stoker, HD fire. He stepped up, hands shaking, and spoke without notes. He spoke about fear, about the weight of fading, about the glow of digging in again. He quoted Musk, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." And he said, "What if the story of your life isn't over? What if it's just paused? Maybe all it needs is a spark, just one spark, to begin again." The room stayed silent afterward. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they heard him. They remembered. After the event, people started showing up at his garage, not for engineering advice, but for the courage to try. The town buzzed for weeks with stories, word of mouth. Small ripples from one man who refused to fade. That night, as he walked back inside, the garage light still on, Mia followed. She handed him a mug of tea. "You were brilliant," she said. "You were glowing." He took the tea, warmth seeping into his hands. He looked around, the flyers, the projects, the quiet hum of possibility woven into the air. He didn't feel old. He didn't feel finished. He felt insurgent. Alive in a way he had forgotten he could be. He sat down and wrote in his journal one line: "Rebellion can be quiet. It can start in the faint glow of a garage in Ohio." He leaned back, looked at the blinking monitor, the soldering iron, the magnet glinting in the corner, the tools of small revolutions. And he whispered, "This is only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Walt Harris hadn't realized how deeply he'd dug in until he felt the tickle of nerves again. It arrived the morning he decided to cross the threshold of his own comfort zone, the day he knew he couldn't just evolve quietly, but needed to step into a world that didn't expect him to belong. The garage had become a refuge, a place where the echoes of Lorna, the hum of old magnets, and his own cautious optimism shaped every idea. But today, that refuge felt like the past. Today, he was going to live his future. He had already accepted Velocity Loop's invitation to a full technical summit, experts from San Francisco to Singapore, engineers, project managers, interns. They'd be reviewing Phase 2 launch timelines, material fatigue data, real-world modular pods, and they wanted Walt there. In person. As he stood beside the open garage door, breathing in dusty shafts of morning light and the faint tang of solder, he remembered Donna's voice, "It's the trying that matters." That voice pushed him. He closed the door gently, pinned one of Mia's posters on it, "Never too old to begin again." Then he locked it, turned the key, and walked away. Packing went in fits and starts. His hands shook uncomfortably as he folded shirts and carried notebooks over to his bed. He found himself reading old letters, one from Lorna, one from Howard, then quickly tucked them in a drawer. He packed again. At the airport, once more, his name on a shiny boarding pass, Walt Harris, Phase 2 Summit. He rode the escalator, lugged his bag, all the while whispering, "I'm not too old." The flight was turbulent, seats rattled, winds roiled outside, and turbulence thumped through the cabin like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, breathing in and out, recalling Elon's words, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Belief, not fear, was moving him forward. The facility was unfamiliar this time, larger, more crowded, more loud. He walked into a cavernous room filled with vaulted ceilings, steel beams, and more screens flickering data than he'd ever seen. Truth was, he paused, letting all of it, and himself, sink in. He felt 40 years younger and 80 years older at once. And then Jaden found him, half laughing and half jogging, pulling him into a sea of introductions. Engineers shook his hand, managers bowed, interns asked whether he'd ever think of a Hyperloop route connecting amusement parks. He laughed. He felt real. The summit kicked off with clinical briskness, presentations, data points, schedules. He sat behind his notebook, adding notes in shaky handwriting, but the ideas came faster now, the feeling, this is where I'm supposed to be. When his turn came, he stood, adjusted his tie, he never wore ties, and spoke. He described the ruggedizing of the graphite-lined rail gasket, its performance under real-world friction conditions, and suggested an algorithm for dynamic pressure monitoring. He spoke quietly, steadily, then paused at a graph projected behind him, red line climbing above the baseline. The room didn't interrupt. They watched. Then a hand raised, "Young engineer. Are you sure the gasket will withstand sub-zero expansion rates in colder climates?" Walt nodded. "Yes. Actually, it improves tolerance by 18% in sub-zero modeling." He pointed to the readings. Heads nodded. Eyes met his eyes. He wasn't invisible. Afterwards, they thronged him. One man said, "Who taught you this?" Walt shrugged. "Hard work." Another asked, "How'd you learn to keep going when everything else told you to stop?" He swallowed. "I didn't stop. I just waited for the world's pause." It was a bold answer, but true. The day stretched into night, and Walt found himself in a corridor bathed in fluorescent light, carrying a cup of lukewarm coffee. A conference organizer approached with a press photographer. "Mind if we get a shot of you with this?" she asked, holding a real mock-up of the Hyperloop test rig. Walt agreed, maybe too willingly. The flash popped. Behind him, blueprints, monitors, and the weight of everything he'd lived and built. When the photographer lowered the camera, Walt realized something. He was no longer an outsider with a forgotten dream. He was part of the plan. Walking back to his hotel that night, he passed glass-walled labs where engineers were still working, people young, old, diverse. All focused on perfecting the tube of tomorrow. He felt connected. Inspiring networks grounded in elbow grease, late nights, and defiance of time itself. That night, he called Chris. He hesitated before hearing his son's voice on the line. "How's it going?" Chris asked. Walt paused. "It's bigger than I thought." "Good bigger?" The good kind. Another pause. You okay? More than okay. It was enough. The next morning, a heavy knock at the door. It was Mia. She stood there with a newspaper clipping, a photo of Walt in a crowd, his name in bold, 68-year-old engineer Sparks Phase 2. You're on front page, she said, eyes shining. I know, he said. She hugged him. You're every kid's dream of their grandparent now. Then I'm on the right journey, he said, voice cracking. After brunch, he returned to the sanctuary of the garage, via late-night calls with Jaden, even though he had a hotel room full of tech and lives to patch together. He locked the door behind him and stood in the shadows before walking forward, breathing in the old smell of oil, graphite, memory, and hope. He looked at his tools, the nameplate, the sketches, the magnet, the memory of Lorna's face taped on the wall. Everything was still here. He realized the garage had never been his comfort zone. It was always the launching pad. And today, goodbye comfort. Hello risk. Hello legacy. And after decades of waiting, hello again to the world that needed him. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Walt's hotel room as he awoke with a mix of excitement and quiet apprehension, a feeling he hadn't known in decades. Today was more than just another meeting at the Velocity Loop headquarters, it was the first real step into a future he had once only dared to imagine in quiet moments of longing. The sterile buzz of the city outside felt distant compared to the roaring hopes inside him. Walt dressed slowly, fingers tracing the faded scars on his hands, scars earned in garages, factories, and countless nights spent chasing dreams both born and deferred. In the mirror, the man staring back was lined with years, but his eyes burned with a youthful fire that refused to be dimmed. He thought of Lorna, her smile like a lighthouse he'd carried in his heart, and he whispered, "This one's for you." As he walked into the Velocity Loop complex, the sleek glass and steel architecture seemed to hum with promise. The hallways buzzed with engineers and visionaries, many half his age, but none with more determination in their step. Jaden met him with a broad grin, his energy infectious. "Ready to build the future, Walt?" he asked. Walt nodded, feeling the surge of belonging. The first task was a collaborative session with the materials science team, researchers pioneering new alloys and composites that would allow the Hyperloop pods to withstand unimaginable stress at speeds nearing 700 miles per hour. Walt listened intently, asking questions, sharing insights from his own years of engineering and experimentation. His knowledge surprised some, but inspired others. When a young engineer raised concerns about thermal expansion at extreme altitudes, Walt leaned in, offering a solution involving adaptive damping that he'd developed during a forgotten project decades earlier. The room quieted as the team scribbled notes and murmured agreement. It was a small victory, but for Walt, it meant everything, proof that age was not a barrier to innovation, only a different lens through which to see. The afternoon brought the first hands-on prototype demonstration. Walt watched, heart pounding, as the miniature Hyperloop pod glided silently through a test tube on a cushion of magnetic levitation, its sleek form shimmering under the bright lights. The engineers cheered softly, aware of the monumental step this represented. Walt felt tears prick his eyes. This was more than technology, it was hope incarnate, a testament to human will and the refusal to accept limits. Later, in a quiet corner of the lab, Jaden handed Walt a tablet showing real-time data from the test runs. "Your insights on friction coefficients helped improve stability by 12%, he said. "Without you, this wouldn't be happening." Walt smiled, the words warming him like sunlight after a long winter. That evening, after a day packed with meetings, designs, and brainstorming sessions, Walt sat alone in his hotel room, the city lights flickering below. He opened his journal and wrote, "I am no longer the man waiting on the sidelines. I am a part of something bigger. A story not just about speed, but about purpose, renewal, and the courage to step forward when the world says it's too late." He paused, fingers hovering over the keys, then typed a message to his online community, "Today I took the first real step. Age is not a limit. It's a perspective." The response came swiftly, messages of encouragement, stories of others stepping out, a wave of quiet revolution gathering momentum. The next morning, Walt was back at the lab, this time invited to join a brainstorming session on integrating AI to optimize pod navigation. It was complex, technical, and daunting, but Walt dove in, contributing ideas about fail-safes and redundancy systems, blending old-school engineering with new-age technology. When one young programmer joked about teaching the old dog new tricks, Walt laughed, retorting, "This old dog's learning to run faster every day." Laughter broke the ice, and barriers fell. As days turned into weeks, Walt's presence became an unexpected fixture at Velocity Loop. His stories, both of success and struggle, inspired the team. He was the bridge between the dreams of youth and the wisdom of experience, a living testament that innovation doesn't retire. At night, back in his modest hotel room, Walt and Mia Skyped frequently. She shared updates on the Golden Sparks project, the community gatherings, and the growing network of seniors rediscovering their creative spirits. "You're leading two revolutions," she told him one evening. Walt chuckled softly. "One small step at a time." On a particularly crisp morning, the Velocity Loop team gathered to celebrate the completion of the first full-scale prototype module. It was a sleek, gleaming marvel, a promise of things to come. Walt stood beside Jaden and other team members, the weight of the moment settling like a mantle on his shoulders. He thought of the long road, the doubts, the losses, the quiet nights in his garage, and he realized something profound: the future isn't a destination, it's a series of brave first steps. The team invited Walt to press the ceremonial button to power up the prototype systems. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed it. Lights flickered to life, monitors hummed, and a low hum filled the room, the sound of dreams in motion. Applause rippled through the crowd. Walt looked out at the faces around him, young, old, hopeful, and felt a surge of gratitude and purpose. The moment felt like a beginning, not an end. That night, as he lay in bed, Walt's mind raced with plans. The Hyperloop was more than metal and magnets, it was a symbol of what was possible when courage meets opportunity. He resolved to carry that message to every corner of his community, every corner of his life. The journey was far from over, but the first step had been taken. Walt closed his eyes and smiled. The future was his to build. Walt never imagined that his journey back into the world of innovation would lead him not only to cutting-edge technology but also into the heart of a generational dialogue he didn't know was missing. As the Hyperloop project progressed, Walt began to notice something profound happening around him, young engineers looking to him not just for his technical expertise but for his stories, his resilience, and his lived experience. It was as if his years of trials and triumphs had become a bridge between two worlds separated by decades but united by curiosity and the desire to create. One afternoon, while reviewing design schematics with a group of interns, Walt found himself laughing with a young woman named Zoe. She was sharp, quick with questions, and full of the kind of raw enthusiasm he remembered from his youth. "You know, Mr. Harris," she said, "it's inspiring to see someone with your experience so involved. Sometimes I wonder if my generation respects the past enough." Walt smiled, feeling a warmth that hadn't touched him in years. "It's not about respect alone," he said slowly. "It's about listening, learning, and understanding that innovation is a relay race. The baton has to pass smoothly." Zoe nodded, her eyes bright. "What advice would you give someone like me?" Walt paused, considering. "Never stop asking questions. Don't fear failure, it's just feedback in disguise. And remember, the older you get, the more important your perspective becomes. Your ideas don't get outdated, they get richer." Over time, Walt became a mentor figure, not in a grand formal way, but through small, everyday moments, a shared coffee, a patient explanation, a word of encouragement when a project stumbled. His presence became a quiet force that shaped the team's culture. During lunch breaks, groups would gather around him, eager to hear tales from his past. Stories about the dawn of computer engineering, the exhilaration of building something from nothing, and the heartbreak of missed chances. These narratives weren't just nostalgia, they were lessons wrapped in human experience. One day, Jaden invited Walt to speak at the company's Innovation and Legacy panel, a forum designed to explore how history informs the future. Walt prepared carefully, feeling the weight of the moment. As he stood before the audience, mostly millennials and Gen Z, he realized that the nervousness he felt was not about speaking, but about opening himself fully, allowing his vulnerability to be seen as strength. Innovation is often mistaken for youth, he began, voice steady. But I've learned it is more about spirit than age, more about persistence than novelty. The greatest ideas come from those who refuse to accept the status quo, no matter their years. He shared how the spark of Elon Musk's words ignited a fire within him, how the fear of being forgotten was transformed into a mission to matter once again. He spoke of the Hyperloop not just as a technical marvel but as a symbol of possibility at every stage of life. After the talk, a young engineer approached him, eyes glistening. "You gave me hope today," she said. "Hope that I don't have to have it all figured out yet." That moment stayed with Walt, proof that his journey was about more than personal redemption, it was about lighting a path for others. Meanwhile, back in his hometown, the community around Golden Sparks continued to grow. Walt and Mia kept the momentum alive with virtual workshops and local events that connected seniors with young people eager to learn skills long forgotten. They discovered that when different generations collaborated, the results were magical, a blend of wisdom and energy that sparked creativity in unexpected ways. Walt's son, Chris, who had once doubted his father's pursuits, began to see the profound impact of this work. He showed up at one community event, hesitant but curious, and watched as his father patiently guided a teenage boy through the basics of circuitry. Watching Walt's gentle, encouraging manner, Chris felt pride swell in his chest. It was a healing moment, not just between father and son but between past and future. On a breezy Saturday afternoon, Walt organized a joint workshop at the town library titled, "Bridging the Gap, Technology and Tradition." The room was filled with laughter and focused concentration as seniors taught woodworking and sewing techniques while younger participants introduced coding and digital design. Walt moved through the crowd, offering advice and soaking in the shared energy. He realized the true power of connection, the way knowledge flows best when it travels both ways. One particular exchange touched him deeply. An elderly woman named Grace showed a group how to craft simple mechanical toys, explaining the physics behind each movement. A high school student, Marcus, listened intently, then asked if he could film her demonstration for a school project. Grace agreed, and soon they were collaborating on a short video that combined storytelling with STEM principles. Seeing Grace's eyes light up as Marcus praised her expertise reminded Walt that legacy is not just about invention, it's about passing on the flame of curiosity. Yet, as joyful as these moments were, Walt also faced challenges. Not all bridges were easy to build. Some younger colleagues struggled to understand his pace or approach, and some seniors resisted the technology that felt alien. Walt learned patience anew, how to meet resistance not with frustration, but with empathy. He took time to listen deeply to concerns about feeling left behind in a rapidly changing world. He shared his own fears openly, inviting others to join him in the journey of learning and adaptation. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Walt sat with Mia over the phone. "Sometimes it feels like we're swimming upstream," he confessed. "Like the world wants to move on without us." Mia's voice was steady and kind. "That's why we have to be louder, Walt. Your story reminds people that progress isn't a race, it's a circle. And everyone belongs in it." Her words resonated. Walt realized his rebellion wasn't just against age or circumstance, it was a rebellion of inclusion, a call to redefine what it means to contribute and belong. As the Hyperloop project edged closer to its next major milestone, Walt found himself reflecting on the paradox of time. The years had taken much, but they had also given him perspective, resilience, and a deeper understanding of purpose. He wasn't just building a transportation system, he was building hope for a world where no one is too old to dream, too broken to rebuild, or too lost to find their way back. One night, as he wrote in his journal, he paused to read a message from Zoe: "Thank you for being the bridge. I hope one day I can be that for someone else." Walt smiled, feeling the circle close. His legacy was not only in steel and magnets, but in the lives he touched, the walls he broke down, and the bridges he built, between generations, between hope and fear, between what was and what could be. He was, at last, exactly where he needed to be. Despite the steady progress and the growing sense of purpose, Walt couldn't shake the creeping shadows of doubt that settled into the corners of his mind. Each day brought its victories, but also a whispering question: was he truly making a difference, or just chasing a mirage? At 68, with a lifetime of what-ifs behind him, doubt was a familiar visitor. One that had followed him through missed chances, fading relationships, and nights spent wondering if he had wasted his time. It came softly, insidiously, wrapping around his confidence like a cold fog. One afternoon, as the Velocity Loop team pored over test data in the conference room, Walt found himself distracted by the chatter of younger engineers brainstorming bold new ideas. They moved fast, spoke in acronyms and jargon that sometimes left him behind, their energy both inspiring and overwhelming. He caught his reflection in the glass wall, an older man, shoulders bent slightly, eyes tired yet still trying to keep pace. The question stabbed at him: was he really part of this world anymore? Later that day, he tried to focus on a complex problem with the pod's magnetic suspension system, but frustration bubbled under his skin. The equations seemed more tangled, the variables multiplying. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted parameters on the screen, a small but unmistakable sign that age was a factor. Returning to his hotel, Walt sat in the dim light of his room, the silence pressing down. He opened his journal, his fingers hesitant over the keyboard. "Am I fooling myself?" He typed, then deleted. "Am I too slow, too tired?" He stared at the blank screen, unsure if he was seeking clarity or sinking deeper into uncertainty. That night, sleep was elusive. Walt found himself scrolling through news articles and videos, among them, a recent interview with Elon Musk. Elon spoke with his usual relentless conviction about taking risks, facing failure, and pushing past limits. Walt paused on one line: "If you're not failing, you're not innovating." The words echoed in his mind, striking a chord that was both painful and hopeful. The next morning, Walt decided to confront his doubts head-on. He reached out to Jaden for a walk outside the complex. As they strolled past sleek labs and prototype pods, Walt spoke candidly. "I'm worried I'm slowing the team down. Maybe this isn't my place anymore." Jaden looked at him with steady eyes. "Walt, every one of us has had that moment. Doubt is a sign you care. But your experience, your perspective. That's what keeps us grounded. We need your voice." The honesty and encouragement lifted some weight, but Walt knew the fight was internal and ongoing. That afternoon, a particularly tough meeting awaited, a review of the latest test failures. The pod's new braking system hadn't performed as expected under simulated emergency conditions, and tensions ran high. Some younger engineers were quick to blame outdated approaches or a lack of tech fluency. Walt felt his pulse quicken, defensive but trying to stay open. When asked for input, he spoke carefully but firmly about the value of patience and iteration. "We can't rush perfection," he said. "The greatest innovations are born from persistence and learning from failure, not just speed." The room quieted, the edge of frustration softening. Later, a junior engineer approached Walt. "I was worried you'd be upset, but I see now how much you care." Walt smiled. "We're all learning, together." As the days passed, Walt embraced a new strategy. Instead of trying to keep pace with every technical advancement, he focused on being a guide, a mentor, a listener, a steady hand in the storm. He began holding informal sessions where team members could share struggles, fears, and ideas without judgment. These gatherings grew into safe spaces that bridged gaps between experience and innovation, doubt and confidence. Back in his hometown, Walt felt echoes of his own struggle reflected in the seniors at Golden Sparks. Many wrestled with similar fears, being irrelevant, forgotten, or too old to change. Walt shared his journey openly, reminding them that doubt is not weakness but a companion on the road to growth. One evening, after a community gathering, a woman named Ruth approached him, tears in her eyes. "I've been so afraid to try new things," she confessed. "But hearing you keeps me going." Walt squeezed her hand gently. "We're stronger together." The ripple effect of these conversations lifted Walt's spirits. He realized that doubt, while unsettling, was part of the creative process. It was the tension before breakthrough, the shadow before the dawn. And Elon's words came back to him: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. Walt took those words as both a challenge and a bomb. Instead of fighting doubt, he decided to lean into it, to use it as a compass rather than a cage. One particularly trying day, when setbacks seemed to pile relentlessly, Walt sat quietly in the corner of the lab, watching a young technician calibrate sensors on a Hyperloop pod. The technician glanced over and smiled, unaware of the storm inside Walt. In that small moment of connection, Walt felt a flicker of hope. The future was messy, uncertain, but alive, and so was he. That night, Walt wrote in his journal, "Doubt is not the enemy. It is the doorway to deeper understanding. I will step through, even if my hands tremble." He closed the laptop and looked out his window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead was still steep. But Walt Harris was no longer afraid to walk it. The weeks following Walt's confrontation with doubt were marked by a quiet but profound shift. He no longer sought to prove himself by matching the pace of the youngest engineers or mastering every new piece of technology on his own. Instead, he embraced his role as a collaborator, a storyteller, and a steady presence in the ever-evolving whirlwind of the Hyperloop project. Yet, as the team prepared for the next major phase, the first full-scale test run of the Hyperloop prototype, Walt felt the stirring of a new challenge, one that demanded not only his technical insight but a leap of faith that reached deep into his soul. The test was scheduled for a clear spring morning on a remote stretch of land outside the city, where the pod would glide along a 10-mile track at record-breaking speeds. Months of tireless work had led to this moment, and the pressure was palpable. Engineers tightened bolts, calibrated sensors, and double-checked safety protocols. Walt stood quietly to the side, heart racing. This was more than a technical trial. It was a crucible for the team, a chance to prove that decades of dreaming could become reality. As the countdown began, Walt caught Jaden's eye. The young engineer gave a confident nod, but Walt could see the tension beneath the surface. "Ready?" Walt asked softly. "As ready as we'll ever be," Jaden replied. The pod hummed to life, magnetic levitation lifting it off the track with eerie silence. Cameras followed as it accelerated, pushing toward speeds that had once seemed impossible. Walt's breath caught in his throat as the numbers on the monitor climbed: 300, 400, 500 miles per hour. The world outside blurred, a testament to human ingenuity and the refusal to accept limits. Suddenly, an alert flashed. A sensor indicated a slight instability in the pod's guidance system. The control room erupted in hurried voices, technicians scrambling to assess the situation. Walt's mind raced. He recalled a conversation with Mia about trusting the process even when it seemed uncertain. It was a moment demanding calm, not panic. He stepped forward and suggested a manual override procedure he'd developed during an early prototype phase, one deemed too complex at the time but now potentially critical. With Walt's guidance, the team engaged the override, stabilizing the pod's trajectory. Cheers erupted as the test continued smoothly to its planned conclusion. Relief and triumph filled the room, but for Walt, the moment held a deeper meaning. He realized that faith in himself, in the team, in the vision, was as vital as any calculation or component. Later, as the celebrations quieted, Walt found a moment alone with Jaden. "You took a risk recommending that override," Jaden said. What gave you the confidence? Walt smiled, the lines of age softening. Experience, yes. But more than that, a willingness to trust what you've learned, even when the stakes are high. Back in his hotel room, Walt called Mia. His voice trembled with emotion as he recounted the day. It wasn't just a technical success. It was a reminder that the impossible can be reached when we dare to leap. Mia's laughter was warm and steady. You're inspiring a whole generation, Walt. Keep taking those leaps. The following days were a whirlwind of media attention and renewed enthusiasm for the Hyperloop. Walt found himself invited to speak at conferences, his story resonating far beyond the engineering community. He spoke not only about technology but about resilience, hope, and the courage to start anew at any age. At Golden Sparks, the local community center buzzed with excitement. Seniors shared Walt's story, and many found their own reasons to leap into learning new skills, reconnecting with estranged family, or pursuing long-forgotten dreams. Walt felt a profound sense of connection, knowing that his leap of faith was rippling outward. Yet, amid the success, challenges remained. The Hyperloop was still a vision in progress, and the path ahead was uncertain. Funding, regulatory hurdles, and technical puzzles loomed large. Walt understood that leaps of faith did not guarantee smooth landings, they required resilience, adaptability, and ongoing commitment. One evening, while reviewing plans in the quiet of his room, Walt reflected on the nature of fear. He realized that fear was not something to be conquered once and for all but something to be embraced, understood, and used as fuel. His leap had been possible because he allowed himself to feel fear, and choose action anyway. The next morning, Walt returned to the lab with renewed energy. He proposed a series of workshops aimed at cultivating resilience and creativity within the team, blending technical skill with emotional intelligence. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon these sessions became a cornerstone of Velocity Loop's culture. Walt's journey was transforming not only the Hyperloop but the people around him. One afternoon, as he walked through the bustling workspace, a young engineer named Lily approached him. She was nervous but determined. "Mr. Harris, I've been thinking about your story. I'm afraid I don't have what it takes to lead, to innovate." Walt looked at her kindly. "Lily, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking the next step despite it. You have everything you need, sometimes you just need to believe it." Her eyes shone with newfound resolve. Walt knew that leaps of faith were contagious. They created ripples of possibility in the hearts of others. As spring blossomed into summer, Walt's leap continued to unfold in ways he hadn't anticipated. He was invited to advise policymakers on the future of transportation, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience and hope. He reconnected with his son Chris, who was beginning to understand the depth of his father's journey. Together, they worked on a community initiative blending technology with local history, a project that wove past and future into a shared narrative. On a clear summer evening, Walt stood on a hill overlooking the city, the lights below twinkling like stars. He thought back to the man he had been, a man shadowed by doubt, regret, and fear of fading away. Now, he was a man reborn, carrying the torch of possibility not just for himself but for all those who believed in second chances. Walt whispered into the night, this leap was never about speed or technology. It was about hope. About the courage to start again. The future was still uncertain, still full of challenges and unknowns. But Walt Harris was ready to meet it head-on, one leap of faith at a time. Walt's journey through the Hyperloop project had brought him back to life in ways he never anticipated, but beneath the technical triumphs and new connections, a personal ache lingered, a quiet but persistent yearning to mend the bridges he had let crumble over the years. Among the most painful was the strained relationship with his daughter, Emily. The silence between them stretched longer than the miles the Hyperloop would one day cover, a gap carved out by years of misunderstanding, missed opportunities, and unspoken regrets. It was a void that Walt knew he had to confront if his newfound purpose was to feel whole. One rainy afternoon, as Walt sat alone in his apartment, he found himself scrolling through old family photos, smiling faces frozen in time, laughter echoing from forgotten moments. He stopped on a picture of Emily as a child, perched on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade. The memory was bittersweet, stirring a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Walt picked up his phone, fingers trembling slightly as he hesitated over her number. Finally, he tapped it and pressed send on a simple message, "Hi Emily. I'd like to talk when you're ready." Days passed without a reply, each one heavier than the last. Doubt crept in again. Had he waited too long? Was it too late to reach her? Yet, Walt remembered Elon Musk's resilience, the refusal to quit even when the odds seemed stacked. He reminded himself that the first step toward healing was simply to try. Then, one evening, his phone buzzed. A text from Emily, "Dad. Let's talk." The words felt like a small miracle, a crack in the wall of silence. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between their homes. When Walt arrived, he saw Emily already there, a mixture of hesitation and hope in her eyes. She looked older than the last time he'd seen her, with lines of experience etched gently on her face. Walt's heart tightened, but he stood steady. They began cautiously, sharing small talk about weather and work. Slowly, the conversation deepened. Walt apologized for the times he had been absent, physically and emotionally, during her childhood and adulthood. Emily listened, her expression softening. She spoke of her own struggles, the loneliness of feeling unheard, and the hope that her father might one day see her fully. The moment was raw and fragile, but it was real. Walt realized that rebuilding trust would not be swift or simple, but it was possible. Over the following weeks, they exchanged more calls and messages, each one bridging the distance a little more. Walt invited Emily to visit the Hyperloop test site, hoping she would see the passion that had reignited in him. When she arrived, her curiosity was evident as she toured the facilities, meeting the young engineers and witnessing the dream that had captivated her father's heart. Watching Emily's eyes light up with interest, Walt felt a surge of gratitude. This was more than a family reunion, it was the rekindling of shared dreams and the promise of new memories. One evening, after a long day at the lab, Walt and Emily sat on the back porch of his home, sipping coffee as the sun set behind the hills. They spoke about hopes, fears, and the future. Emily shared her own aspirations, her desire to make a difference in the world, to break free from the doubts that had held her back. Walt listened, offering encouragement drawn from his own journey. "It's never too late to start again," he said gently. "We all carry the power to change, no matter our age or past." The reconciliation wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of frustration, misunderstandings, and old wounds surfacing. But with each conversation, Walt and Emily learned to navigate the delicate balance of forgiveness and acceptance. They discovered that love, though sometimes fragile, could be resilient. As their relationship grew, Emily began volunteering with Golden Sparks, inspired by Walt's work connecting generations. She brought fresh ideas and youthful energy, sparking new initiatives that blended technology with community care. Together, they organized events where seniors taught traditional crafts while younger volunteers introduced digital skills. The collaboration became a symbol of healing and hope, a living testament to the power of connection. One afternoon, during a community workshop, Walt noticed Emily helping a shy teenager overcome her fear of public speaking. Watching her nurture confidence in another reminded Walt of the woman she was becoming, strong, compassionate, and full of promise. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of peace. The past's shadows had not disappeared, but they no longer held him hostage. He was no longer a man defined by regrets but by the courage to rebuild and embrace the possibilities ahead. The Hyperloop project continued to advance, fueled by the collective spirit of innovation and resilience that Walt and his newfound family embodied. As the first prototype neared completion, Walt reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the setbacks, the triumphs, and the unexpected gifts of reconciliation. He realized that true transformation was not just about technology or achievement but about healing the heart and forging bonds that transcend time. On a crisp autumn evening, Walt and Emily stood together at the edge of the Hyperloop test track, watching the pod glide silently along its magnetic rails. The moment was filled with quiet wonder, a symbol of what was possible when courage met hope. Walt turned to Emily and smiled. "This is just the beginning." Emily nodded, her eyes shining. "For both of us." The journey of rekindling old flames was far from over, but Walt Harris had learned that the most profound innovations often start with a single brave conversation. And in that, he had found a new legacy, one built not just on speed and steel but on love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Walt Harris had long understood the tangible barriers that slowed progress in engineering, the weight of materials, the limits of energy, the physics of speed. But as he moved deeper into the world of the Hyperloop project, he realized there were barriers far less visible but no less formidable. The invisible walls of ageism, doubt, and societal expectations pressed heavily against him and many of his peers. At 69, Walt faced these barriers daily, in boardrooms filled with younger voices, in casual dismissals masked as jokes about being too old, and in the quiet moments of self-questioning. Yet, within these challenges lay the very fuel for transformation. The question was how to break through them, and whether he could inspire others to do the same. One morning, Walt received an invitation to speak at a conference titled Innovation Across Generations, hosted by a prestigious tech institute. The event promised to bring together seasoned professionals and emerging talent to discuss how experience and youthful energy could combine to drive progress. Walt accepted eagerly but with a nod of anxiety. Public speaking wasn't new, but standing before an audience that might dismiss him for his age was intimidating. In preparation, Walt revisited his journey, the fears, the doubts, and the leaps of faith that had shaped his work on the Hyperloop. He crafted a speech not only about technology but about the human spirit, the strength found in resilience and the power of breaking barriers at any stage of life. The day of the conference arrived, and Walt stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warm but unforgiving. He began with a question: how many of you have ever felt invisible because of your age? Hands rose, some tentative, others confident. Walt smiled, feeling an immediate connection. He spoke openly about his own struggles with doubt and invisibility, sharing the moments when society's whispers told him to step aside. But then he shifted the narrative, telling of his leap into the Hyperloop project, the mentorship he'd embraced, and the new legacy he was building. The audience listened, rapt, as Walt recounted how Elon Musk's fearless mindset had been a spark for his transformation. "Innovation isn't just for the young," Walt declared. "It's a fire that burns inside anyone willing to fight through fear and doubt." After his speech, Walt found himself surrounded by attendees, young engineers eager to learn from his wisdom, older professionals inspired to reignite their own passions. A young woman named Maya approached him. "Your story gives me hope. I've been afraid to pursue my ideas because I thought I was too old to start." Walt placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The only limit is the one we accept. Keep pushing." Energized by the experience, Walt returned to Velocity Loop with renewed vigor. He proposed a new initiative, an intergenerational innovation lab, designed to foster collaboration between seasoned experts and younger talent. The concept was met with enthusiasm by management but skepticism from some team members who doubted the value of mixing such different perspectives. Walt saw this as another barrier to break. He organized a kickoff event where teams were mixed across ages and experience. Initial conversations were tentative, marked by assumptions and misunderstandings. But as projects took shape, the diverse teams discovered unexpected strengths. Veterans brought strategic thinking and historical context, while younger engineers introduced fresh ideas and technical agility. Walt observed with pride as barriers of age and hierarchy began to crumble. In the lab's first challenge, a team struggled to optimize the pod's energy efficiency. A spirited debate unfolded, with older and younger engineers offering contrasting solutions. Walt encouraged open dialogue, reminding everyone that every idea deserved a hearing. Slowly, the group coalesced around a hybrid approach that combined time-tested principles with cutting-edge technology. The breakthrough was celebrated not just as a technical success but as proof that barriers could be overcome when respect and curiosity led the way. Outside the lab, Walt's work with Golden Sparks mirrored these lessons. He helped launch workshops where seniors learned digital skills while teaching traditional crafts to younger volunteers. The exchanges bridged generational divides and challenged stereotypes about aging and relevance. One afternoon, while leading a session on creative problem-solving, Walt noticed a newcomer named Harold, a retired engineer who had long felt sidelined. Harold's hands shook slightly as he manipulated a tablet, frustration evident. Walt approached gently. "We all start somewhere," he said. "The important thing is that you're here." Encouraged, Harold persisted, and soon became one of the most engaged participants, sharing insights from his decades of experience. The impact rippled through the group, reigniting hope and connection. Meanwhile, back at the Hyperloop facility, the project faced new hurdles, regulatory setbacks, budget overruns, and technical glitches threatened to stall progress. Some voices whispered that the dream was slipping away, that Walt's involvement was a nostalgic holdover rather than an asset. But Walt refused to succumb to cynicism. Drawing on the resilience he'd cultivated, he spearheaded problem-solving sessions that drew from the collective wisdom of the entire team. His leadership style, grounded in empathy and openness, helped shift the atmosphere from blame to collaboration. During one particularly tense meeting, a young project manager voiced frustration over slow decision-making. Walt responded calmly, "Progress is rarely a straight line. Sometimes we need patience as much as speed." The room fell silent, then nodded in reluctant agreement. Over time, the culture began to change. Barriers that once seemed immovable became gateways to innovation. Walt's example inspired others to challenge assumptions about age, ability, and value. One evening, as he left the lab, Walt was stopped by a group of interns who wanted to hear more about his journey. He shared stories of setbacks and breakthroughs, emphasizing that the true measure of success was the willingness to keep going. "Age isn't a wall," he told them. "It's a bridge. Cross it with courage." Reflecting on the path he had traveled, Walt recognized that breaking through barriers was not just a personal victory but a collective one. It was a message that rippled beyond the lab walls, into communities, families, and hearts. The invisible walls of doubt and exclusion were real, but they were not invincible. With determination and connection, they could be torn down, brick by brick. As the Hyperloop project moved closer to reality, Walt felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His journey had transcended technology, it had become a testament to human potential at every stage of life. Standing in the glow of the prototype's test track one evening, he whispered to himself, "The barriers I once feared have become the milestones I've passed. And there are more to come." Walt Harris was ready for them all. The morning of the final full-scale Hyperloop test was electric with anticipation. Months of planning, problem-solving, and relentless perseverance had led to this moment. Walt Harris stood on the observation platform overlooking the gleaming track, the sleek pod poised like a silver arrow ready to fly. The crowd was a mix of engineers, investors, journalists, and community members, each carrying their own hopes and doubts about what the future might hold. For Walt, this wasn't just another test. It was the culmination of a lifetime of second chances, of battles fought against invisibility and doubt, and of the belief that change was possible no matter the age. As he looked around, his mind flashed back to a pivotal moment that had sparked everything, the day he first heard Elon Musk speak about the impossible, about daring to dream when the world said no. It was a memory etched with sharp clarity, the raw energy in Musk's voice as he declared, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That phrase had become Walt's mantra, a guiding star through dark nights of uncertainty. Today, that mantra felt alive in the pulse of the Hyperloop itself, humming quietly beneath the surface. The countdown began. Walt's heart pounded in rhythm with the ticking seconds. The pod's engines powered up, magnets humming with increasing intensity. The crowd fell into a hush as the pod began to move, slowly at first, then faster, faster, until it vanished in a blur down the track. Time seemed to stretch, every second suspended between hope and fear. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the control screen. A pressure sensor had dropped below optimal levels. The room tensed. Was this a fatal flaw, a sign that the dream was doomed? Walt's mind raced. He recalled a simulation from weeks earlier, a similar anomaly that had been corrected through a last-minute recalibration. Trusting his instincts, he suggested a manual override to stabilize the system, just as he had during the first test. The room hesitated but acted swiftly. The override engaged. The pod steadied. The tension eased. Cheers erupted as the pod completed the circuit at record speed, exceeding all expectations. Walt's chest swelled with pride and relief. This was the moment it all changed, not just for the Hyperloop but for him. The victory was a testament to resilience, to daring to act despite uncertainty, to the power of belief and experience combined. As the crowd celebrated, Walt caught sight of Emily, standing among the observers, her eyes shining with pride and tears. It was a moment of shared triumph, a bridge between past regrets and new beginnings. Later that day, Walt was approached by a young journalist who asked, "What kept you going when so many told you to slow down or give up?" Walt smiled, the years folding softly into his gaze. "I learned that it's never about age or circumstance. It's about refusing to let fear define you, about choosing hope when it's hardest." The story of the test quickly spread, capturing the imagination of the nation. Walt's name became synonymous with reinvention, proof that innovation and courage are ageless. In the weeks that followed, Walt's work with Velocity Loop and Golden Sparks intensified. He saw firsthand how the energy from the Hyperloop's success sparked new initiatives, encouraging seniors across the country to pursue their passions and defy expectations. One afternoon, during a workshop, Walt shared his story with a group of retirees hesitant to embrace change. He told them about the moment the pod shot down the track, about the fear and doubt that almost held him back, and about the power of a single leap of faith. The room filled with nods and smiles as lives shifted in real time. Walt realized that the moment it all changed wasn't just about technology or speed. It was about the human spirit, the courage to start again, to break through barriers, and to believe in what others say is impossible. Standing beneath the vast American sky, Walt felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The road ahead was still long and full of challenges, but he was no longer alone or afraid. The moment it all changed was just the beginning of a new chapter, not only in his life but in the story of what it means to grow, to dare, and to thrive. Walt Harris had learned that monumental change rarely came from sweeping revolutions overnight. Instead, it often began with one simple, intentional shift. A single choice that defied the inertia of doubt and opened a door to possibility. For Walt, that one thing was a commitment to action, to step beyond fear and embrace the unknown. It wasn't about building a Hyperloop or mastering the latest technology alone, it was about transforming himself and encouraging others to do the same. After the triumphant test run, Walt reflected deeply on what had propelled him forward. Was it the endless hours in the lab? The technical expertise? Or was it something more intangible, a mindset shift that allowed him to move from passivity to purpose? The answer became clear one quiet morning as he sat in his favorite coffee shop, watching people pass by, young and old, busy and still. He realized that what he had changed wasn't just his work but how he showed up in the world. He had chosen to be seen, to engage, to risk vulnerability. That day, Walt made a promise to himself: he would no longer wait for permission to matter. He would actively seek out opportunities to contribute, to connect, and to inspire. This shift became the foundation of everything he did next. Walt started small but deliberately. He began attending community events, not as a spectator but as a participant and leader. He spoke at local libraries and senior centers about the power of lifelong learning and the value of experience. His message was clear: age is not a limitation but a wellspring of wisdom and potential. One afternoon, Walt met Sarah, a retired schoolteacher struggling with the feeling that her best days were behind her. She confessed to Walt that she had always dreamed of writing but felt it was too late to start. Walt listened, then shared how he had launched a blog documenting his Hyperloop journey, not for fame but to connect and grow. Encouraged, Sarah began writing her own stories, finding joy in the process and community in sharing. Inspired by Sarah's courage, Walt proposed a new initiative within Golden Sparks, a storytelling workshop for seniors eager to express themselves and preserve their legacies. The program blossomed quickly, with participants rediscovering their voices and building bridges between generations through shared narratives. Meanwhile, at Velocity Loop, Walt advocated for creating mentorship programs that paired seasoned professionals with young engineers. He believed that such connections would not only transfer knowledge but also challenge stereotypes, foster respect, and ignite innovation. Despite initial resistance, the program gained traction as its success became evident, teams grew stronger, and morale improved. Through these efforts, Walt saw firsthand how the simple act of showing up and offering one's gifts could ripple outward, transforming individual lives and entire communities. The Hyperloop was more than a transportation marvel, it was a symbol of what could happen when people refused to be sidelined by age or fear. Walt's personal transformation inspired him to take bolder steps. He began collaborating with local governments to advocate for policies supporting senior entrepreneurship and education. His voice, once quiet and uncertain, now carried weight and urgency. One memorable day, Walt stood before a city council, passionately arguing for funding a community tech lab accessible to all ages. His speech was grounded in data but powered by stories of seniors like himself who had rekindled purpose and pride through learning and creation. The council approved the proposal, marking a significant victory for inclusivity and empowerment. Back home, Walt's relationship with Emily deepened through shared projects and open conversations about the future. They planned a joint event, a community innovation fair where people of all ages could showcase their ideas, skills, and dreams. The event was a joyful celebration of connection and possibility, drawing hundreds of participants and spectators. As Walt prepared his remarks for the fair, he thought about the journey that had led him here, the doubts he had faced, the barriers he had broken, and the lives he had touched. He realized that the one thing he had truly changed was his belief in himself and his refusal to be defined by limitations. He shared this insight with the crowd, his voice steady and warm: we all have the power to change our stories. It doesn't matter where we start or how old we are. What matters is that we choose to take that first step, to say yes to ourselves again. The crowd responded with applause and tears, moved by the authenticity and hope in Walt's words. Among them, Walt spotted Maya, Harold, Sarah, and many others whose lives had been touched by his courage and vision. Together, they embodied the living proof that transformation was possible at any stage. That night, as Walt sat quietly reflecting, he felt a profound sense of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But he was no longer afraid. He had changed not just the trajectory of a revolutionary technology but the course of his own life and the lives of those around him. In that moment, Walt Harris understood something essential: the one thing that changes everything is the decision to believe you can. To act, to connect, to embrace growth. To refuse to be invisible. That choice, simple yet profound, was the catalyst for a new legacy, one that would outlast any invention or achievement. And with that, Walt smiled, ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?